Welcome to the league with your hosts, Benoy Thanjan. You might know me as the Solar Maverick, and David Magid. It is August 14th, 2026. You give us 5 minutes, we give you the latest energy trends or maybe clean energy trends. I was at RE Plus Mid-Atlantic, which was actually in Philadelphia this week. And one of the big takeaways was the solar industry is really changing. It's always changing. That's how it is to be on the solar coaster. It's not just about solar anymore. It's about integrating different technologies. There's still obviously a lot of uncertainty about policies, but developers are trying to understand what happens with projects going into 2026 and 2027. A lot of projects were safe harbored in 2025. The July 4th deadline for 2026 passed, and now people are trying to figure out how to use the safe harbor provision transition rules, understanding FEOC, which is foreign entity of concern guidance. We haven't received all the guidance related to that, and that applies to 2026 projects. This obviously is affecting how projects get financed, equipment gets selected, and ultimately whether projects get built at all. And it leads to another interesting issue too that's happening right now, inverters. Most people outside the solar industry don't think much about inverters, but they're one of the most important components in a solar battery system. They control how electricity from the system interacts with the grid. Now inverters are becoming part of a much bigger conversation around tariffs, supply chain, cybersecurity, and national security. A lot of inverter manufacturing has historically come from China, and policymakers are asking whether we should depend on foreign control technology for equipment that connects directly into the US electric grid. For developers, it's not just a political issue, it affects equipment costs, bankability, financing, and project timelines. So when I look at everything happening, my biggest takeaway is that solar has become a much more sophisticated business. You can't just understand solar panels anymore, you have to understand storage, complexities related to permitting, interconnection, tax policy, tariffs, cybersecurity, finance, and where electricity demand is going. Also, speed to grid has become a big thing with all the energy usage required for data centers. The opportunity is still tremendous, especially with electricity demand growing so quickly. But I think the companies that you see that will win during this time will be the ones that understand the entire energy ecosystem and not just solar. And that's that.
Benoy, great insights. I feel like you touched upon so many different topics that can go down various rabbit holes. So appreciate you sharing that for the audience, understand all the intricacies and how to strive and get ahead in this market.
Yeah, anytime. I mean, I think there's so many different things that are happening. The conversation about inverters, now there's going to be tariffs and you can't get it from other countries. Potentially by the end of December was a big topic at RE Plus Philadelphia, and people are still trying to understand it.
Without a doubt. So we're going to go to the Commonwealth in Massachusetts. Recently, the 83E solicitation has been released. This is round number 2. And for those of you living under a rock or not involved in this market, this is related to energy storage. It's an offtake RFP. And there was approximately maybe 3 or 4 awardees last year. The total solicitation is approximately 1 gigawatt. Out of that 1 gigawatt, there is approximately 700 megawatts that's earmarked for utility scale. The remaining is earmarked for the DG market. DG market, you're looking at those 5 megawatt battery energy storage facilities. Utility scale, you're looking at 40 megawatt plus connected to the transmission system. This 83E solicitation, lots of rumors and lots of talk regarding this agreement being essentially an ISC contract. And essentially that contract would be modeled very similar off of what had taken place in the New York market, which is the contract for differences. That contract was heavily anticipated, just having a 20-year agreement with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for a bundled product, that handles capacity, the energy, as well as CPECs. And CPECs are the environmental attributes that are attributed from these battery energy storage facilities, which is very particular to Massachusetts and has been very lucrative and provides some predictable cash flows for these battery energy storage facilities. So right now, the way the solicitation was earmarked is that the CPECs, are currently, still that's what the solicitation is for, is a 20-year contract for those CPECs, which is great. Contracted cash flows is golden. That being said, for your capacity and your energy, you are still going to need to go ahead and find alternatives, so that you're not operating on a merchant, market basis. That being said, some other interesting components, of this solicitation is that this solicitation, was heavily debated, between the utilities, and, the DOER, regarding this, because there was a lot of push to have this as a bundle product. Utilities pushed back, and provide some basis behind their pushback. One other interesting component for this is there is projects that are operational that are now actually allowed and permitted to bid into this. So as the solicitation opens up, you're actually going to be bidding against, projects that are operational, have not received these awards. So take it for what it's worth. This is going to be a competitive marketplace. Zooming out into the storage market into Massachusetts, as we spoke about, in one of our previous sessions, the interconnection studies, that came out of the first FERC 2023 order were absolutely ridiculous and crazy. Costs were extremely high, which is a challenge. Permitting is definitely a challenge with all these NIMBYs, but there is a statewide process to overcome that. So I think right now, biggest opportunities in Massachusetts is you've got statewide permitting process to de-risk that on that front. You have contracted cash flows, at least on the CPECs, at this point, even if you're not awarded, you still have a mechanism, for some predictable cash flows that can be hedged. And, I think the risks to be aware of on this front is you have very high construction costs. The permitting is very, constringent on sound and noise barriers, which add extreme costs to these projects. Then the other fronts, of, dealing with these projects is the high interconnection costs, network upgrades. So that's the parameters around the program. Feel free, take a look at the links below, and we'll share some more information on this. They are looking for COD dates, that exceed 2032. So it's clearly they recognize, all the barriers that are going on. Now, as we move markets, let's jump over, and see what Governor Abbott has been doing. As we all know, ERCOT market, has lots been going on with ERCOT. I'm not going to talk about ERCOT 0 right now. We may talk about that in a different session. That being said, over 474 gigawatts of applications, for large loads, which approximately 93% of that is attributed to data centers. That is, what the ERCOT queue currently looks like. That being said, the governor has put a pause on these applications until this comprehensive audit, can be completed. The audit is related to the water usage, the operators, and some more parameters, to actually have a good understanding of what is being operated within the ERCOT grid. Clearly, this 474 gigs is not going to get built. Only a small fraction of it is. In addition to that, ERCOT has increased the non-refundable deposits that are required, so making higher barriers, to entry within this market. And as Benoy and I were speaking earlier, we obviously are seeing this as a trend in different markets for different reasons. We talked about New York State putting this moratorium to figure out the data center aspects for data centers over a certain capacity. So similar pause, different reasons. Obviously for this aspect of it, the amount of gigawatts and fundamentals of all the data is really crucial to understand from market perspective. And it's really getting, the market in orders. So lots of movement, lots of policies to pay attention to. This, grid of ours is actually being rebuilt at a very fascinating place. There's more money than ever that's flowing into the energy industry, with this large load. So everyone needs to take advantage of that, while they're there. And that's that. You've just enjoyed 5 minutes of the absolute best information in the clean tech energy sector. Make sure you hit subscribe, 5 likes, and that's that. God bless.